Third-person gaming isn't just a camera angle or perspective, it's also just a fun way to play some games. Here are 20 third-person games for 2020 we're really looking forward to. Starting off at number 20, Zombie Army 4 Dead War is a fun one, and we promise it's not as generic as its title sounds. This comes from Rebellion, the devs behind the Sniper Elite series, and this is a spin-off of that. It controls pretty much the same with the slow-mo sniper shots and everything. It's pretty mindless, honestly, but not in a bad way. It's fairly addicting, actually taking on waves and waves of zombies while also managing your ammo and other equipment. Sniper Elite and Zombie Army aren't doing anything revolutionary with how it controls or any other aspect of the game, but that's kind of what makes them shine. That's why they're so good. It's a nice, arcadey, simple, turn off your brain and just have a good time kind of game. And there's still plenty of room for games like this, and I welcome all of them with open arms. Moving on to number 19, we have Gods and Monsters. This one we actually don't know too much about. We know it's being made by the creators of Assassin's Creed, which is cool because, you know, we do like Assassin's Creed, who doesn't? We also know that it kind of looks like Breath of the Wild, which is also cool. We also like Breath of the Wild. Also, judging by the armor the character in the trailer is wearing and the structures you see, it seems like it's going to take place in ancient Greece. You also see what looks like a Medusa-type creature wandering around, and according to the store listing, the gods are all messed up and you're working on saving them with the special powers they've given you. You'll also be going up against mythical beasts like Hydras and Cyclops. That's really all we know about this one, but we're very excited to learn more. Moving on to number 18, we have Twin Mirror, the next game from Life is Strange devs Don't Nod. This is a third-person adventure game where you play as an investigative journalist who just returned to his hometown of Basewood, West Virginia for the funeral of his best friend. As you can expect, you're pretty shaken up about that, and you wake up in your hotel room one night with a bloody t-shirt and no memory of what you were up to the night before. It's one of those games where all of your decisions have an effect on the game's ending and story. It actually looks pretty interesting, and Don't Nod has a good track record with games like this, and this one seems a bit darker than the last few games from them, and personally I love when stuff gets dark. At number 17, this next one is something we're actually really excited about. Senuas Saga Hellblade 2, the sequel to one of our favorite games of 2017, Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice. We actually know close to nothing about Hellblade 2. We know that it was announced with a super badass trailer at the Game Awards, and we know that Senua is in it, and we also know that this is a next-gen game. That's really it. We just have that one trailer to go off of so far. For those of you that don't know what Hellblade is all about, you play as Senua, and she's on a quest to rescue her lover's soul from Hela. Senua struggles with mental illness, which she actually thinks is a curse, and it's a very dark game with some amazing visuals and equally amazing audio design. This is one of those games that is way better played with headphones. If you haven't played Hellblade yet, I really think you should, because it's a super memorable experience. At number 16, have you ever been playing a game and thought, man, this game would be way cooler if I was a shark? Well, have I got news for you. Maneater is a third-person action RPG where, you guessed it, you play as a shark, whose only goal is to wreak havoc and get revenge on a fisherman named Scaly Pete who killed your mother and messed you up in the process. The majority of the gameplay, at least from what we've seen and played so far, seems to just fall into the category of dumb fun as you're swimming around just causing mayhem, jumping out of the water and snatching people off of boats and beaches and eating them up or throwing them at other enemies, while also hunting other aquatic life to obtain nutrients for bonuses, as well as getting rare mutagens and unlocking new abilities and letting you take on bigger, deadlier creatures. Yeah, it's probably exactly what you expected, and honestly, that seems like a pretty good thing to me, because sharks rule. At number 15, Marvel's Avengers is an interesting one. This is being developed by Crystal Dynamics and Eidos Montreal, and it's an interesting take on the superhero genre. Instead of being more of a traditional single-player experience like PS4's Spider-Man, it's instead going for a more Destiny games-as-a-service type approach. It's still a single-player game with a campaign and all of that, but there are missions that you'll be rerunning with friends. There's a color-coded loot system with different pieces of gear having different stats, and of course it wouldn't be a superhero game without some cool unlockable costumes. The story does seem pretty cool. It starts on A Day, where the Avengers are unveiling their new San Francisco headquarters and new helicarrier. Of course, in typical comic book fashion, bad guys show up and ruin it, destroying most of the city and also killing Captain America in the process. Following these events, the Avengers break up. 5 years later, Kamala Khan discovers some shocking conspiracy and sets out to get the Avengers back together to save the day. So yeah, obviously Kamala, or Miss Marvel, is the main character here, which I personally think is awesome. Between the comics, MCU movies, other games, we've gotten a lot of stuff with the big five, and there's more to the Avengers lineup than just them. It's time to make room for some of Marvel's other characters. There is a big, diverse list of characters that are also deserving of some of that spotlight. Moving on to number 14, after the success of 2018's Dragon Ball FighterZ, it was only a matter of time before there was a resurgence in Dragon Ball video games, and while the majority of them since came out on mobile platforms, we finally got a full third-person console action RPG with Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. As is the case with so many of the games before it, it's more or less a retelling of the Dragon Ball Z story in video game form. If you've ever played the old Game Boy Advance Legacy of Goku games, which were pretty awesome by the way, this is basically that, but with prettier graphics and more horsepower under the hood from the modern consoles. While it may not have a full open world, the game does feature several pretty sizable hub areas where you'll be flying around, collecting orbs, and messing up all sorts of dudes while you make your way through the main story and a ton of side quests. It's a fun diversion if you want to just hang out with Goku and relive that classic Dragon Ball Z story again, or maybe even for the first time, who knows. Moving on to number 13, we have Final Fantasy VII Remake. Okay, so this one has been a long time coming, like a long time coming. Teased for the better part of a decade, and only officially announced at E3 2015, people have been begging for this one for literal console generations, and it's finally here, it's finally happening. In case you somehow didn't know, the game is a full, ground-up retelling of the original Final Fantasy VII that came out in 1997. You'll play as Cloud Strife and his crew of mercenaries and other misfits in an effort to fight the Shinra Corporation and stop them from draining the planet's life energy. All of that stuff is the same, but where the game differs is the way it plays. The combat system has been completely overhauled, moving it from that traditional turn-based battle system to something way more action-y, similar to what we've seen in games like Kingdom Hearts 3 and Final Fantasy 15. The active time battle system is modified, with the meter still gradually filling, but filling way faster by attacking, and once full can be used to activate special abilities, magic, items, stuff like that. Another cool improvement is in this new system. You can also switch between party members for direct control and utilize each character's individual strengths and skills in a given combat scenario. It's a really interesting change to see. Next up at number 12, we have No More Heroes 3. After 10 years and a weird spin-off game, we're actually getting a real mainline sequel to No More Heroes, which is frankly kind of wild, to be honest. Taking place 9 years after No More Heroes 2, the world is under siege by an alien threat led by a humanoid alien named FU. Or Fu, I don't really know, but either way, I love it. Who was raised on Earth and sent off to space 20 years earlier by a human named Damon. Now back on Earth, FU, or Fu, intends to conquer Earth with the help of Damon and 8 other aliens, and decide to utilize superheroism as their means of world domination, establishing the new galactic superhero rankings. So seeing this, former top assassin Travis Touchdown goes back to Santa Destroy from his self-imposed exile, ready to take on the legion of superpowered aliens and climb their rankings once again, and, saving the world in the process. Yeah, that's all we know, but it's apparently slated for a 2020 release date, so we're bound to see it in a Nintendo Direct sooner or later. In the meantime, we're just shocked that they're making a numbered No More Heroes game, which is still pretty awesome. Coming in at number 11, Godfall is one that's still partially shrouded in mystery, given that it was an early announcement for a PlayStation 5 game, but here's what we do know about this upcoming Counterplay Games joint. The game is reportedly set in a world of high fantasy split into the elemental realms of earth, air, water, spirit, and fire. The players will take on the mantle of one of the last of the Knight's Order and have to prevent the apocalypse, basically. You'll select your class by choosing a Valor plate, and you can gain additional ones or agent them to customize how the character class plays and functions in combat. The game will be playable single player, as well as supporting up to 2 additional players in drop-in, drop-out co-op, and has a Diablo-style loot system, which makes sense as it's been described as a looter slasher, with gameplay and weapon inspiration said to be taken from the Monster Hunter series, which is an interesting touch. Yeah, that's pretty much everything we know about Godfall, but with the PS5 supposedly only months away, we'll definitely be seeing more very soon. Moving on to number 10, we have Nioh 2, which actually takes place before the events of the first game. With this one, you're getting more Nioh, so Souls-like gameplay and some challenging gameplay at that. I hear this one is a lot more difficult than the first game. They also changed things up a bit, so this time you're actually creating your own character instead of playing as a preset one, and there's a heavier focus on looting this time around, to the point of it seeming almost overwhelming, and there are a ton of different weapons, each one controlling differently than the last. Honestly, I don't need much convincing on this one. I was a huge fan of the first game, and everything about this one just seems like more Nioh, and if that's what this is, then sign me up. At number 9, Outriders is a third-person cover shooter with RPG elements developed by People Can Fly, the studio behind other fast-paced shooters like Painkiller and Bulletstorm. In Outriders, during the colonization efforts of an alien planet, the expedition team encounters a massive energy storm, which ends up granting both the planet's inhabitants and the colonial expedition team's superpowers. From there, you'll create your custom character and choose your character class, which can range from things like the flame-manipulating Pyromancer, the Heavy Devastator, the time-manipulating Trickster, stuff like that. We're still learning more about this one, but as of right now, we know that it leans heavily into the cover shooter style, but with a loot system similar to games like The Division and Destiny, with the world level increasing with your player progression, doling out better rewards as a result. You'll also encounter NPCs, converse with branching dialogue trees, you know, all of that RPG goodness. Like we said, details in this one are still rolling out, but we're excited to learn more and get our hands on it as we approach release later on this year. At number 8, okay, so Yakuza 6 came out a couple of years back, and with it came the end of the Kiryu story that's been running since the series' inception all the way back in 2005. Now, 15 years after the first entry, we're getting Yakuza Like a Dragon, which not only features a new protagonist and setting, but it also changes up the way the game is played. Think of it as a sort of soft reboot for the series. The story is more of the mob melodrama you've come to expect from the series, which is a good thing, but the real change comes in the form of the gameplay differences. Rather than a beat 'em up, Like a Dragon features turn-based RPG combat with a 4-person battle team complemented by characters having character classes like you see in other RPGs, so you can really make sure your team works well together. That said, you can still have your characters use environmental objects in combat, so you can have one of your guys grab a nearby bicycle and then use it to beat another dude right into the ground, which, no complaints here, that's awesome. It's been out in Japan for a minute now, and we're beyond excited to see it come stateside later on this year. Moving on to number 7, we're finally getting a new Watch Dogs game, and this time it's set in London and comes with a bunch of really cool gameplay updates. So where previous games had you playing as set characters like Aiden Pierce or Marcus Holloway, Watch Dogs Legion has a very different approach. Instead, Legion will let you recruit characters into DedSec through unique missions, and you'll have control of these recruited characters, which is a pretty big departure from the previous games. Once you get new characters, they're assigned as either being a stealth, hacking, or combat class, each of which feature their own unique set of tools, abilities, and upgrade trees, as well as unique backgrounds which determine their special skill or trait. You gotta be careful with these characters too, because if they get killed on a mission, they're gone. That's it, they're dead. So you could have spent a lot of time playing as and upgrading one character, only to have a mission go incredibly poorly and you just don't have that character anymore. It's a really cool change, especially considering how samey a lot of Ubisoft's open world games have been, so it's good to see the studios pivoting to switch things up like that. Next up, at number 6, we have Elden Ring, which is one that's pretty mysterious as we don't have a lot of specifics about this game, but we do have small tidbits of information to go off of. First off, From Software is working with George R.R. Martin on this one. You know, the dude that wrote Game of Thrones. Do people like that anymore? Didn't something happen? I don't really know. Anyway, with this one, From Software seem to be making a more traditional RPG. Well, traditional for them, meaning it'll be more like Dark Souls than Sekiro. They will be doing something new, though, and making the world more open, but not like Witcher or Skyrim, where it's this big giant world filled with towns and people that live there, but more of, Dark Souls-y, where there's just kind of nothing, because it's just this desolate, dead world. Hidetaka Miyazaki said, if we would add towns on top of that, it would become a bit too much. So we decided to create an open world style game focused on what we are best at. He also went on to say that it's big enough to the point where you'll be traveling on horseback, so there you go. Take that information and do whatever you want with it. We don't know much about the gameplay except for the fact that it's more RPG-ish than Sekiro, and that big scary bosses are going to be a thing, which, you know, it's From Software, and at this point, I just think they have to be in every game they make. We also don't know too much about the setting of Elden Ring either, but seeing that George R.R. Martin is involved, we're expecting some pretty dope fantasy stuff. Maybe it'll be Game of Thrones-esque, which is a cool mix of medieval knights and Viking stuff. At times, Westeros was pretty dark and gritty, so I can totally see something like that working in a FromSoft game. Next, at number 5, we have Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord. Set 200 years before the previous game, Mount & Blade Warband, it's nice to see that it straight up just looks so much better than its predecessor right out the gate, as well as some big updates to the gameplay, specifically in regards to AI. They've also talked about how the inventory interface is going to be significantly more efficient, as well as various other improvements to the game, like the siege system. This one has been in the pipeline for a long time, so we're looking forward to seeing people finally get their hands on it in 2020, and we're also looking forward to not including it on next year's best looking third-person games list. Moving on to number 4, we have Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, or the sequel, or whatever it's going to be called, announced at E3 2019. We don't really know much, but we're getting more Zelda gameplay in the style of Breath of the Wild, with the same characters and the same vibe. That's really all we know. Link and Zelda are in it, and there's speculation as to what's new, if there's co-op, what the world is like, but frankly, at the time of making this video, not much is confirmed as the game was announced and then shrouded in secrecy. 2020 might be the year, we hope so, that's why we're including it, because Breath of the Wild was awesome. At number 3, next up, we have Ghost of Tsushima, along with Last of Us Part 2. This is one of the last PS4 exclusives before moving on to the next generation of PlayStation consoles, and it looks great. You play as Jin Sakai, one of the last surviving members of his clan, and he's hell-bent on protecting his people against the Mongol Empire, who has already taken out entire nations during their campaign to conquer the East. The game looks absolutely gorgeous too. I mean, come on, just look at this. This is the next game from Sucker Punch, the team behind Sly Cooper and Infamous, and this is a pretty different game for them, and I can't wait to see how they handle this one because they're a great studio that puts out some really great games. Coming down to number 2, remember how great the Resident Evil 2 remake was? Well, now we're getting a remake of Resident Evil 3. Resident Evil, really matters again. Not that it ever stopped mattering, but I'd say now it's back in full force since Resident Evil 7, and man, I am here for it. It's getting the glow up that Resident Evil 2 got, with the camera moving behind the shoulder, making it a bit more action heavy, although Resident Evil 3 was always more action-y than the first 2 entries in the series anyway. Then of course there's Nemesis, which seems like a more relentless, more annoying version of Mr. X. This thing wants you dead, and you're going to be dealing with him a lot, and they gave him a bunch of new tricks as well. So, along with his meat tentacles, he can also dash in front of you like he's Batman. Yeah, he seems extra annoying, kind of not looking forward to hanging out with him. Packaged with Resident Evil 3, you'll also be getting Resident Evil Resistance, an asymmetrical multiplayer mode where 4 players will play as survivors and are trying to not get killed by the player controller, the Mastermind. This player will be able to spawn enemies, set traps, and even take control of some of those enemies and try and kill other players. Those controllable enemies range from zombies to taking control of Mr. X. It doesn't seem like a shoehorned multiplayer mode, which is nice. It seems like its own thing that Capcom is just throwing at us with Resident Evil 3, and it actually looks like a lot of fun. Finally, at number 1, it's time to talk about Last of Us Part 2. Yeah, this is the big one. It's hard to talk about this one without getting overly excited, seeing that it's the sequel to a game that many consider to be one of the greatest games of the last decade, me being one of those people. I mean, what's not to get excited about? I can barely think of specifics. I mean, you get to play as Ellie this time around, which is freaking awesome because I love Ellie, she's badass. Joel is back, but we don't know in what context. I still think he's dead, but that's just me. We actually don't really know what this game is really even about, other than Ellie has it out for someone and she's probably gonna kill them. Naughty Dog has done an amazing job of not showing off a lot of this game, giving you just enough to know what it looks like and how it'll control, but not giving up too much else. And it seems pretty dark and gritty, man. Not that the first one wasn't, but there was that one bit of gameplay we got where it just starts off with Ellie slitting a dude's throat in the most violent way. This is probably my most anticipated game of the year. Yeah, Cyberpunk is cool, but Last of Us Part 2 is what 2020 is all about for me. Before we go, we got some bonuses for you. First off, we have New World. This is an MMO developed by Amazon Game Studios with a unique spin of being a colonial fantasy game. It's expected this year, and it looks kind of cool. Then we have Destroy All Humans, the remake. Crypto makes a comeback in this gorgeous remake of the original game, taking some design cues from the second game, and retaining all the charm, humor, and voice acting you were expecting. And it's dropping sometime this year in 2020. Then finally, we have Psychonauts 2, very much a sequel to the first game in pretty much every possible way, from gameplay mechanics to the storytelling to the art style. It's all more or less the same, which I'm sure for hardcore fans is a very good thing. And those are the 20 best third-person games coming in 2020, but we want to hear from you, so meet us down in the comments and let us know what you think, because I'm sure there's a few that we missed. As I'm sure you already know, hitting that like button really helps us out, and if you're new here, subscribing is a good idea, because we put out videos like this every single day. As always, thank you for stopping by and taking the time to hang out with us. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.